Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're not listening to legends to be scared. We're listening to understand why fear once kept people alive. Long before books, laws, or schools, medieval folklore quietly shaped how people slept, obeyed, healed, raised children, and survived the dark. These were not fairy tales, they were instructions disguised as monsters, warnings whispered through bedtime stories, rules hidden inside fear. Tonight's journey moves slowly through disturbing medieval folklore, creatures that guarded the night, household fears that enforced order, witches who knew too much, children taught obedience before comfort, and stories so powerful that even today we still follow them without realizing it. Because here's the unsettling truth: we no longer believe these stories, but we still obey them. So before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or quietly reflect on our shared journey through time. Now, close your eyes. There's nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to fear. Tonight, the stories will watch for you while you rest. In the medieval world, fear was not designed to shock the heart or paralyze the mind. It was not entertainment, and it was never meant to be thrilling. Fear, in its quiet medieval form, was practical. It was slow, deliberate, and deeply woven into everyday life. People did not gather around fires to scare themselves for pleasure. They listened because fear carried instructions. It whispered where not to walk, when not to linger, and whom not to trust. In a world without streetlights, without maps, without modern medicine or reliable protection, fear became a guide. It pointed away from danger long before danger announced itself. Medieval folklore grew from this need. It was not fantasy, it was memory, shaped into story. When villagers spoke of forests that swallowed travelers, they were not inventing monsters for drama. They were describing places where paths disappeared, where cold crept into bones, where a wrong step could mean never returning home. The forest became a character because the forest was unpredictable. It fed when treated with respect and punished those who underestimated it. Night, too, was never neutral. Darkness concealed cliffs, strangers, animals, and illness. Stories warned that the night was listening, watching, waiting. Not because the dark itself was evil, but because survival depended on returning indoors before the light faded. Fear taught timing, it taught boundaries, it taught restraint. Medieval people understood something modern minds often forget. Curiosity without caution could be fatal. So folklore placed fear exactly where it was needed. Not everywhere, only at the edges, at the river that flooded without warning, at the crossroads where travelers vanished, at the door left open too long after sunset. These stories carried moral weight not because they preached, but because they remembered consequences. A child learned not to wander because wandering figures in stories did not come back unchanged. An adult learned not to ignore warnings because those who did often vanished quietly from the village record. Fear was not cruelty, it was collective experience condensed into narrative. Over time, this fear became linked to virtue. To fear the right things meant you respected the balance of the world. It meant you understood that survival required humility. Arrogance invited danger. Carelessness invited loss. Medieval folklore reinforced this belief gently, through repetition rather than force. Stories were told again and again, not to frighten, but to remind. The right fear made you cautious. The wrong fear made you reckless.
This distinction mattered deeply. To fear imagined threats within the safety of the village was unnecessary, but to fear the real dangers beyond it was wisdom. In this way, fear became moral. It aligned behavior with survival. A person who feared the forest respected it. A person who feared the night planned their return. A person who feared strangers observed before trusting. These were not acts of paranoia, they were acts of care. Care for one's body, care for one's family, care for the fragile continuity of life across winters. Medieval folklore did not scream danger, it murmured it. It spoke slowly, the way warnings must when they are meant to be remembered. And once fear had delivered its lesson, it softened. The story did not linger on terror, it released it. Fear was never meant to stay forever. It arrived, instructed, and then stepped aside, allowing the listener to rest, knowing they understood how to live one more day, one more season, one more winter.
As fear settled into medieval life, it did not remain wild or uncontrolled. Over generations, it became refined. It learned where to stand and where to step back. Medieval folklore did not attempt to frighten people endlessly, because endless fear exhausted the body and clouded judgment. Instead, fear was measured. It arrived with purpose, delivered its warning, and then allowed space for calm. This balance was essential. A frightened community could not function. A careless one could not survive. Folklore lived between these two extremes, teaching people how to feel just enough fear to stay alive without losing their sense of order. This is why medieval stories rarely ended in chaos. Even when danger appeared, it was contained. The forest did not invade the village. The night did not swallow the home. Boundaries mattered. Fear belonged outside the circle of firelight, not within it. Inside the home, stories softened. They reminded listeners that safety existed when rules were followed. This created a psychological rhythm that helped people sleep. Danger was acknowledged, but it was also placed at a distance. The mind could rest knowing it had been warned. In this way, folklore functioned like a mental map. It did not describe every possible threat. It highlighted the most important ones, the ones that history had proven real. Fear of strangers, for example, was not about hatred. It was about uncertainty. In a world where disease traveled silently and intentions were difficult to read, caution protected entire households. Stories taught listeners to observe before trusting, to wait before welcoming. This was not cruelty, it was patience. The same applied to fear of isolation. Tales warned against wandering alone, not because solitude was immoral, but because help was rare beyond the edge of community. Survival depended on proximity. To be alone was to be vulnerable. Folklore transformed this reality into narrative memory. Over time, fear became a shared language. When someone hesitated at the forest's edge, others understood without explanation. When a door was locked early, no one questioned it. Fear created social coherence. It aligned behavior without force. No guards were needed, no punishments were announced. The stories themselves carried authority. This authority did not come from threat, but from familiarity. Everyone had heard the same tales. Everyone understood their meaning. Fear, therefore, became quiet. It did not shout commands. It suggested restraint. It encouraged foresight. Medieval people trusted fear because fear had proven reliable. Those who ignored it often disappeared from the story altogether, not dramatically, quietly. Forgotten names, unmarked paths, unanswered questions. Folklore absorbed these absences and turned them into guidance. In doing so, it preserved life.
But fear also knew when to leave. Once the lesson was learned, the story did not continue tightening its grip. It loosened. The listener was allowed to breathe. This release was crucial. Without it, fear would have lingered too long, following people into their sleep. Medieval storytellers understood this intuitively. Their stories curved gently toward calm. They reminded listeners that danger was not constant, that safety was possible, that rest was earned by attention, not by panic. Fear had a beginning and an end. This structure mirrored the natural cycle of day and night, work and rest, vigilance and sleep. In honoring this rhythm, folklore supported not only survival, but peace of mind. It allowed people to close their eyes knowing they had done what was necessary to see another dawn. And in that quiet moment before sleep, fear faded into memory, where it belonged, ready to return only if needed.
Over time, fear in the medieval world stopped feeling like an external force and began to live quietly inside people. It no longer needed to be announced through stories told aloud. It became instinct, a pause before stepping too far, a hesitation before trusting too quickly, a gentle awareness that some boundaries existed for a reason. This was the final transformation of medieval fear. It was no longer something imposed from outside, it was something carried within. And because of that, it no longer felt heavy. Fear had done its work and softened into wisdom. This is where folklore completed its purpose. It was never meant to keep people afraid forever. It was meant to shape behavior until survival no longer required constant reminders. Once fear became internalized, stories changed their tone. They grew quieter, they slowed, they became less about warning and more about remembering. In this stage, fear and morality became indistinguishable. To fear the wrong path was to choose the right one. To fear excess was to value moderation. To fear isolation was to preserve community. Medieval people did not separate ethics from survival. What kept you alive also made you good. This belief was subtle but powerful. It allowed societies to function without constant enforcement. A person who respected fear respected life itself. Folklore reinforced this not through punishment, but through example. Stories showed what happened when fear was ignored, but they did not dwell on suffering. They allowed consequences to speak quietly. This silence made the lesson stronger. Fear that screams is easy to dismiss. Fear that whispers is remembered. As night fell and fires dimmed, these stories did not agitate the mind, they settled it. Listeners did not lie awake imagining danger, they rested, knowing they had been prepared. This preparation created peace. The mind relaxes when it feels informed, it sleeps when it trusts its instincts. Medieval folklore, at its deepest level, was not about darkness, it was about reassurance. It told people that the world was dangerous, yes, but also understandable. That danger followed patterns, that survival was possible for those who listened. This understanding softened fear into acceptance. People did not expect safety everywhere, they expected meaning. If something was feared, there was a reason. If something was protected, there was a rule. Life felt ordered, even when it was fragile. And within that order, rest was possible. Fear no longer chased people into their dreams. It stood guard at the edges, allowing sleep to come. This is why medieval stories often ended quietly, not with victory, not with terror, but with continuation. Life went on. Morning came. Winter passed. Another year began. Fear did not disappear, but it no longer dominated. It became a tool, placed gently back on the shelf of memory, ready but unused. And in that stillness, people slept, knowing that fear had done its job, knowing that the stories had carried them far enough, and knowing that for now, in the safety of firelights and familiar walls, nothing more was required of them. The stories softened, and with it, the world grew calm. Some monsters were never created to kill. In the medieval imagination, many creatures existed for a quieter purpose. They stood not as hunters, but as warnings. They appeared at thresholds, not in homes, at forest edges, not in villages, at moments when someone stepped just a little too far beyond what was safe, acceptable, or wise. Medieval people did not imagine monsters as random chaos. They imagined them as guardians of invisible lines, lines that mattered more than laws because they were learned through experience, not punishment. The werewolf, for example, was not simply a beast driven by bloodlust. It was a symbol of what happened when a person abandoned restraint. A man who wandered too far from community, who surrendered to impulse, who forgot the rhythms of work, rest, and belonging, became something else. Not evil, but uncontrolled. The story did not say the werewolf hunted without reason. It appeared when order was broken. Night spirits followed the same logic. They did not roam freely in daylight. They emerged when the sun had set and rules had shifted. Children were told that certain beings listened in the dark, not to frighten them into panic, but to guide them back indoors. Darkness was not forbidden, but it was conditional. Stay too long, wander too far, forget the boundary between safety and risk, and the night would respond. Forest beings, too, were rarely portrayed as cruel without cause. They guarded paths, springs, and ancient trees. They punished disrespect, not curiosity. A traveler who asked permission passed unharmed. One who took without care did not. These stories taught something essential. The world was alive with limits, and those limits were not enforced by human hands alone. For children, monsters became teachers long before teachers existed. A child learned not to wander by imagining eyes in the trees, learned not to scream at night by believing something listened, learned to return home before dark because home was where monsters could not follow. These lessons were absorbed gently through repetition and imagination, not force. Fear was present, but it was shaped. It did not overwhelm, it instructed. Importantly, monsters did not appear all the time. This absence mattered. If creatures had been everywhere, fear would have lost meaning. Instead, they appeared only when rules were broken. This created trust in the stories. The monster was not arbitrary, it was responsive. It arrived as consequence, not chaos. Medieval folklore understood that behavior changes more effectively when consequences feel natural rather than imposed. A monster felt like part of the world, not an external punishment. Over time, these stories created an internal compass. People did not need to see a creature to feel its presence. They sensed when they were nearing a boundary. The monster lived in that hesitation, that pause before stepping off the path, that moment of doubt before entering the forest alone. This was the true power of folklore creatures. They did not control through terror, they guided through awareness. At night, as fires burned low and stories were told softly, these creatures did not linger in the mind as threats. They settled into memory as signals. Do not go further. Do not take more than you need. Do not forget where you belong. And when these lessons were learned, the creatures withdrew. The forest grew quiet again, not because danger vanished, but because balance was restored.
the monsters had done their work. They had guarded the night without ever needing to attack.
As the medieval night deepened, the creatures of folklore changed their shape. They were no longer beasts with claws or fur. They became quieter presences, barely seen, often only sensed. Night spirits were not imagined as attackers. They were imagined as listeners, watchers, keepers of rhythm. Medieval people believed the night itself had rules, and these spirits existed to enforce them gently. Sleep was sacred, but it was also vulnerable. To fall asleep too far from shelter, too far from firelight, was to invite imbalance. Stories spoke of beings that drifted through darkness, not hunting bodies, but correcting behavior. A restless child who refused to sleep, a traveler who pushed forward when rest was needed, a mind that wandered too loudly when silence was required. Night spirits arrived not with violence, but with unease, a chill in the air, a sense of being watched, enough to send someone back to bed, enough to remind them that the night was not meant for wandering thoughts or endless motion. In this way, folklore protected rest itself. Medieval life depended on cycles. Day was for labor, night was for recovery. Those who disrupted this rhythm paid a price, not immediately, but gradually. Exhaustion weakened judgment. Illness followed. Accidents multiplied. Night spirits personified these dangers. They gave shape to consequences that otherwise felt abstract. Instead of saying rest was necessary, stories showed what happened when it was ignored. A spirit lingered near the sleepless. A shadow pressed closer. The message was clear without being cruel. Return to stillness. Return to balance. For children, these stories carried special weight. A child who feared the night spirit learned to close their eyes, learned to trust sleep, learned that safety came with surrender, not resistance. Adults, too, absorbed this lesson. Even warriors respected the night. Even kings rested behind walls and guards. No one was meant to challenge darkness endlessly. Folklore made this rule universal. It applied to all. Night spirits did not judge status. They responded only to behavior. This fairness made them trustworthy. They were not malicious. They were corrective. Forest spirits followed a similar pattern. At night, the forest became something else. Paths blurred. Sounds traveled strangely. Stories warned that spirits walked when humans should not. These beings did not chase, they misled. A wrong turn, a path that curved unexpectedly, a sense of direction slowly dissolving. The punishment was subtle. Those who ignored rest found themselves lost, not attacked. Eventually, they learned to stop, to wait for morning, to respect the forest's cycle. Again, the lesson was not terror, but humility. The forest belonged to itself at night. Humans were guests, not owners. These stories shaped instinct. Over time, people did not need to remember the details. They felt the rule in their bodies. Fatigue signaled withdrawal. Darkness signaled pause. Fear faded into intuition, and intuition guided behavior more gently than fear ever could. This was the brilliance of medieval folklore. It transformed external monsters into internal signals. Night spirits lived on as sensations, the heaviness of eyelids, the slowing of breath, the desire to lie still. These were not enemies, they were allies of survival. When rest finally came, the spirits withdrew. Silence returned. The forest settled.
The night resumed its quiet watch.
Eventually, the monsters of medieval folklore began to disappear, not because people stopped believing in them, but because people learned what they were meant to teach. A monster was never the destination of the story, it was a signpost. Once the direction was understood, the sign no longer needed to be seen. This is why in so many medieval tales, creatures fade away quietly. They do not die, they do not get defeated, they simply withdraw. The werewolf does not return when restraint is restored. The night spirit drifts away once rest is accepted. The forest being vanishes when respect is shown. The lesson completes itself, and the creature dissolves back into silence. This pattern mattered deeply. It told listeners that the world was not ruled by constant threat, but by conditional presence. Monsters existed only when imbalance existed. When humans stayed within the rhythms of life, the creatures had no reason to appear. This understanding transformed fear into trust. People trusted that if they listened, nothing would come for them. Fear no longer hovered endlessly. It rested, it waited, and because of that, sleep became possible. Children grew up knowing that monsters were not lurking everywhere. They were markers, activated only by disobedience or excess. This reduced anxiety rather than increasing it. The monster was predictable, it followed rules, and anything that follows rules can be lived with. Adults internalized this logic as well. A boundary respected meant a night undisturbed. A rhythm honored meant a forest that remained quiet. Over time, the presence of monsters became unnecessary. People did not need to imagine claws or shadows to feel restraint. They felt it in their bodies. A tiredness that said stop. A stillness that said stay. A comfort that said you are where you belong. This was the final role of folklore creatures. They trained instinct. They educated the senses. They taught humans to align with the environment instead of fighting it. Once that alignment was learned, the stories softened further. They lost sharp edges. They became bedtime tales rather than warnings. The monster, once feared, became familiar, almost gentle. Something remembered, not dread. This familiarity allowed folklore to pass safely from generation to generation without traumatizing its listeners. It also allowed nights to remain calm. The absence of monsters was not emptiness, it was confirmation. Confirmation that balance had been restored, that rules were being followed, that nothing needed to intervene. And so the forest grew quiet again, not in tension, but in rest. The night held no watchers because none were needed. The path stayed clear because no one strayed. Firelight flickered steadily, undisturbed by fear. In this calm, medieval people slept, not because they believed the world was harmless, but because they believed it was understandable. Monsters had shown them where not to go. Once they listened, silence followed. This is the forgotten comfort at the heart of medieval folklore. It was never about living in terror, it was about earning peace. The creatures guarded the night so that humans did not have to, and when the work was done, they stepped aside, leaving only stillness behind. Not all fear lived in the forest. Some of it lived quietly inside the home, settling into corners, warming itself by the hearth, listening from beneath the bed. In the medieval world, the house was not merely shelter. It was a living system of rules, habits, and silent agreements. People believed that the home remembered behavior, that it noticed carelessness and rewarded attentiveness. Folklore did not treat the household as neutral space. It treated it as sensitive, responsive, and watchful. The hearth, for example, was more than a source of warmth. It was the heart of the home. Stories taught that disrespect near the fire invited trouble. A careless word spoken too close to the flames could draw misfortune, not because the fire was malicious, but because it symbolized balance. The hearth fed the family when tended gently. It punished neglect through smoke, sparks, or cold. Fear here was intimate. It did not roar, it reminded. Beneath the bed, too, folklore placed presence, not to terrorize sleep, but to enforce order. Children learned to keep the sleeping space calm, clean, and still. The space where the body rested was sacred. Disturb it, and rest would be disturbed in return. Stories spoke of small household spirits who disliked chaos. They did not harm, they disrupted. Sleep became uneasy. Dreams grew restless. The lesson was subtle. Peace requires care. Windows at night carried similar meaning. An open window invited more than air. It invited unpredictability. Medieval households believed that darkness moved differently through openings. Sounds traveled inward, intentions followed. Stories warned that one should not speak loudly near open windows after sunset, not because something would attack, but because boundaries mattered. The home was safe when its edges were respected. These beliefs shaped behavior gently. Doors were closed with intention. Fires were banked carefully. Beds were made thoughtfully. Fear was woven into routine, not spectacle. Over time, the household became a quiet teacher. Children absorbed its rules without formal instruction. Adults reinforced them through habit. The house, through folklore, controlled behavior more effectively than any external authority. No guards stood watch, no punishments were declared. The stories did the work. Each home developed its own variations. A creak in one house meant warning. A fecker in another meant attention. This personalization made the system believable. Fear felt local, not abstract. It belonged to that home, that family, that rhythm of living. Importantly, household fear was not meant to dominate. It existed to create harmony. When rules were followed, the house felt warm, predictable, and safe. When ignored, it felt unsettled. This responsiveness taught accountability. Actions had consequences, even when no one was watching. Over time, people trusted their homes. They listened to the sounds. They noticed the changes. They adjusted behavior accordingly. Fear, once again, softened into guidance. It did not linger. It passed through daily life like a whisper, easily ignored once understood. And as night settled in and the fire burned low, the house grew quiet. Nothing needed to intervene. The rules were being followed. The home rested with its inhabitants, and the fire kept burning softly. As medieval households settled into night, people believed they were never entirely alone inside their walls, not in a threatening way, but in a watchful one. Folklore spoke of small, quiet presences that lived with the family, not against it. These household spirits were not demons or monsters. They were caretakers of routine. They noticed patterns. They responded to disruption. A home that followed its rhythms felt calm. A home that ignored them felt restless. These spirits did not punish loudly. They corrected subtly. A spoon left in the wrong place would be misplaced again. A door slammed in anger would creak for days. Sleep would come lightly. Dreams would wander. The message was never spoken, but it was understood. Order mattered. Intention mattered.
The home reflected the behavior of those who lived within it. This belief shaped daily life in powerful ways. People moved more gently through their spaces. They spoke more softly at night. They treated objects with care, not because they feared retaliation, but because respect maintained harmony. Children learned this early. They were taught that running wildly indoors unsettled the house, that shouting near the hearth confused the spirits, that clutter beneath the bed invited unease. These ideas created a sense of shared responsibility. The house was not owned, it was shared. To live well inside it required cooperation. Over time, this cooperation became instinct. People no longer thought consciously about spirits. They felt when something was off. A room felt wrong. A silence felt strained. Folklore gave language to these sensations. Instead of anxiety, there was explanation. Instead of fear, there was correction. Tidy the space, lower the voice, restore balance. Windows played a special role in this system. They connected inside and outside. During the day, they welcomed light. At night, they required caution. Medieval stories warned that leaving windows open after dark blurred boundaries, not because something evil would enter, but because focus would leave, the mind would wander, sleep would thin. Closing a window was an act of grounding. It signaled readiness for rest. The house responded by settling. Firelight steadied, shadows softened. These rituals worked because they aligned mind and environment. Household folklore functioned as early psychology. It externalized inner states into stories that could be managed. Restlessness became a spirit's complaint. Carelessness became a household's discomfort. By framing behavior this way, people could correct themselves without shame. The home was not judging, it was guiding. Importantly, these fears did not grow stronger at night, they grew quieter. As the fire burned down and voices softened, the spirits were believed to retreat. Their work was done, the rules had been observed, the house no longer needed to remind. This withdrawal allowed sleep to deepen. People trusted that nothing would disturb them if they had behaved with care. Fear had already done its job earlier in the evening. Now reassurance took over. The house felt warm, enclosing, protective. The walls were not barriers, but companions. This sense of companionship reduced loneliness. Even in silence, people felt held. The house breathed with them. Folklore transformed architecture into comfort. And so the night passed gently. No sudden shocks, no intrusions, just the slow settling of space and body together. The house rested because its people rested. The spirits watched no more because nothing needed watching. Order had been restored, and the night moved on quietly.
With time, the quiet fears of the household no longer felt like fear at all. They became habit. What once required stories and reminders slowly transformed into instinctive care. People no longer thought about spirits beneath the bed or presences near the hearth. They simply moved gently. They spoke softly when night arrived. They closed doors with intention. The rules no longer needed names. They lived in the body. This was the final achievement of medieval household folklore. It turned vigilance into comfort. The home did not need to frighten its inhabitants to keep order. Order had become natural. The whispered rules no longer sounded like warnings, they sounded like reassurance. When the fire was tended properly, it burned evenly. When the room was kept calm, sleep came easily. When boundaries were respected, nothing stirred. In this way, the house taught trust. It showed that safety was not the absence of threat, but the presence of balance. Medieval people did not expect silence without effort. They earned it through attention. And once earned, it remained. The idea that each home contained its own quiet law system was deeply comforting. It meant that protection was close, that guidance did not come only from the outside world, but from within the walls that sheltered you. Even alone, a person was never unguarded. The house itself participated in care. This belief softened loneliness. It replaced uncertainty with familiarity. At night, as shadows stretched and the fire dimmed, the home did not feel empty. It felt attentive, not watching in suspicion, but in companionship. Nothing needed to appear to prove safety. The absence of disturbance was proof enough. Folklore rarely described household spirits leaving dramatically. They did not vanish in flashes or sounds. They simply stopped being needed. When children grew accustomed to order, the stories faded. When adults internalized rhythm, the warnings softened. Fear dissolved into routine. This dissolution was intentional. A home filled with constant fear could never rest. Medieval folklore understood this deeply. Its goal was not to keep people alert forever, but to allow them to relax once they had learned how to live well within their space. And so, the house became a place where fear ended its journey. The forest held danger, the night held mystery, but the home held resolution. It was where stories slowed, voices lowered, and bodies finally surrendered to rest. The fire kept burning softly, not as a signal of threat, but as a sign of continuity. It reminded the sleepers that warmth would return in the morning, that order would persist, that nothing needed to change during the night. In this stillness, medieval people slept deeply, not because they believed nothing could go wrong, but because they trusted the systems they had built. The whispered rules had done their work, the house stood steady, and fear, having fulfilled its purpose, lay down with them, quiet at last.
Healing once required belief, not proof. In the medieval world, medicine was not a science separated from fear. It was a conversation with it. When pain arrived, people did not immediately ask what caused it. They asked what it meant. The body was not seen as a machine with broken parts. It was seen as a map, layered with signs, memories, and unseen forces. Blood, bones, breath, and warmth were read like symbols. To treat the body was to interpret its language. Medieval folklore grew in this space between suffering and understanding. Remedies were rarely about certainty, they were about reassurance. A poultice of herbs did more than soothe skin, it soothed the mind by offering structure. A charm tied around the wrist did more than promise protection. It created the feeling that something was being done, that pain was not being ignored. Fear needed acknowledgement before it could loosen its grip. Blood held special meaning in this world. It was not simply a fluid, it was vitality made visible. When blood was lost, something essential was believed to be slipping away. When blood was released deliberately through ritual or treatment, it was thought to restore balance. The logic was emotional rather than anatomical, but it was powerful. People trusted what they could see. Blood confirmed that the body was responding. Bones carried their own symbolism. They were the structure beneath the surface, the proof that something solid endured even when flesh failed. Bone fragments, ground powders, and relics were believed to carry stability. They reminded the sick that endurance existed within them. Folk medicine used these symbols carefully, not to shock, but to anchor belief. The treatments worked because they made sense within the worldview of the time. Illness was not random, it was a message, and messages required response, not dismissal. Charms and spoken words played a similar role. They gave fear a form. Once fear had a form, it could be addressed. A whispered prayer, a repeated phrase, a protective object near the bed, all served the same purpose. They created boundaries around pain. They told the body that it was being watched, tended, and understood. This reduced panic. Panic intensified suffering. Calm softened it. Medieval healers, whether trained or not, understood this intuitively. They did not rush the body, they negotiated with it. Healing was a slow agreement between belief and sensation. Pain was not forced to leave, it was invited to rest. This approach shaped the experience of illness. The sick were rarely left alone. Community gathered. Stories were told softly. Remedies were applied with care. Fear was present, but it was shared. Shared fear became lighter. Folk medicine thrived because it created meaning where none was obvious. Even when treatments failed, they provided comfort. They offered explanation, and explanation reduced despair. In this way, healing became less about curing and more about enduring. The body felt held within a system of care. That feeling mattered. It allowed pain to ease, even if only slightly. And as belief settled in, the grip of suffering loosened. Not completely, not suddenly, but gently, enough for rest to begin, enough for the body to stop resisting, enough for sleep to arrive, and pain slowly loosened its grip.
In medieval thinking, the body was never separate from the unseen. Every ache, every weakness, every sudden fever was believed to leave a trace not only on flesh, but on meaning. Bones, especially, held a quiet authority. They remained when everything else changed. Skin healed, blood returned, breath steadied, but bones endured. Because of this, medieval folklore treated bones as anchors. They were reminders that something firm existed beneath pain. Healers often spoke of illness as something that wandered through the body, settling where balance had been lost. Bones mark the places where balance could be restored. A relic near the chest was not meant to cure the lungs, it was meant to reassure the heart. A fragment placed near the bed did not promise recovery, it promised endurance. This distinction mattered. People were less afraid when they believed they could endure, even if they could not immediately heal. Charms worked in similar ways. They did not fight disease directly, they organized fear. A charm gave fear a boundary. It said, "This far and no further." Words spoken over the body were chosen carefully, not shouted, not rushed, spoken slowly, with repetition. Repetition calmed the mind. Calm softened pain. These rituals created predictability in moments when the body felt unpredictable. Folk medicine thrived on this predictability. It did not surprise the sick, it reassured them. The same gestures were repeated, the same phrases returned. Familiarity replaced panic. Over time, the body responded, not always by healing completely, but by relaxing its resistance. Pain often tightens when it is feared. When fear is contained, pain loosens. Medieval healers may not have known anatomy as we do, but they understood attention. They understood that a watched body behaves differently than a neglected one. They understood that suffering deepens in isolation, that belief shared is belief strengthened. Healing rituals were communal for this reason. Family gathered, neighbors assisted, someone always stayed nearby. Illness was not hidden, it was witnessed. Being seen mattered. It told the body it was not alone. This reduced despair. And despair, more than injury, was believed to invite death. Folk medicine therefore focused on keeping hope present. Not loud hope, quiet hope, the kind that sits by the bed and waits. Blood, when used in treatment, followed this same logic. It was never about loss alone, it was about exchange. Something was given so something else could return. Balance was the goal. Fear was acknowledged, not denied. In acknowledging fear, people felt control.
Control did not mean mastery over illness, it meant participation. The sick were not passive, they took part in rituals, they repeated words, they held objects, they consented to the process. This participation reduced helplessness. Reduced helplessness softened suffering. Over time, pain felt less sharp, not because it vanished, but because it was no longer overwhelming. Folk medicine created a narrative where pain had a role and an endpoint, even if the endpoint was rest rather than recovery. This narrative allowed the body to slow down. Breath deepened, muscles relaxed, sleep arrived more easily. In this way, belief did not replace healing, it prepared the body for it. Or, when healing was not possible, it prepared the body for peace. And as rituals concluded, as charms were set aside and words faded into memory, the body felt less threatened. Fear had been spoken to, it no longer needed to shout. Pain responded by loosening its grip little by little.
In the end, medieval healing was never about defeating pain. It was about understanding it well enough that it no longer needed to shout. Pain, in the medieval mind, was not an enemy to be destroyed, but a signal asking to be acknowledged. When ignored, it grew louder. When feared, it tightened its hold. But when approached through ritual, belief, and shared attention, it softened. This was the quiet genius of folk medicine. It reframed suffering as a relationship rather than a battle. Blood, bones, charms, and whispered words were not weapons. They were gestures of listening. They told the body, "You have been heard." Once heard, pain no longer needed to demand attention through force. Medieval people trusted this process because it matched their lived experience. They knew that fear intensified discomfort. They knew that calm reduced it. Folk healing created conditions for calm. It slowed time. It focused attention. It replaced uncertainty with meaning. Even when illness could not be cured, it could be endured with dignity. This dignity mattered. It allowed people to rest without panic, to breathe without resistance, to sleep without fighting their own bodies. In many stories, the sick person did not suddenly recover. Instead, they drifted into a deep, restorative sleep. This sleep was seen as a turning point, not always toward health, but toward peace. Sleep was where the body negotiated its own balance, free from fear's constant interference. Medieval healers respected this. They did not wake the sick unnecessarily. They kept the room quiet. They dimmed the light. They trusted that the body, once reassured, knew what to do. Over time, folk medicine transformed fear into acceptance. Acceptance did not mean surrender, it meant cooperation. The body and mind stopped arguing, they worked together. Pain was allowed to exist without dominating awareness. This reduced suffering more effectively than force ever could. The greatest threat to healing was not illness itself, but isolation. Folk medicine countered isolation through presence. Someone always sat nearby. A hand rested close. A voice murmured gently. These simple acts anchored the sick person in the world. They reminded them that they belonged. Belonging reduced fear. Reduced fear eased pain. As beliefs settled in, muscles relaxed, breathing slowed. The nervous system, though unnamed, found balance. Folk rituals were remarkably effective at this level. They aligned expectation with sensation. They prepared the body for rest. In this state, even severe pain could loosen slightly, enough to allow sleep, enough to allow the body to repair what it could, and when repair was no longer possible, enough to allow letting go without terror. This is why medieval folk medicine persisted for centuries. It met a human need deeper than cure. It met the need for reassurance, for meaning,
for companionship and suffering. Modern medicine would later bring proof, precision, and control, but medieval healing offered something else: permission to rest. And rest was often the most powerful medicine available. As the night deepened and rituals concluded, fear no longer needed to stay alert. It had been acknowledged, addressed, and given form. Pain responded by easing its grip, not disappearing, but loosening. The body sank into the bedding, breath found its rhythm, the mind drifted away from vigilance. In this surrender, healing of a different kind occurred, the healing of fear itself. And with fear quieted, the body was finally free to sleep, and pain slowly loosened its grip.
Death in the Middle Ages wasn't an ending, it was a neighbor. It lived close enough to be noticed, close enough to be acknowledged, and close enough to be respected. Medieval people did not imagine death as a sudden disappearance into nothingness. They imagined it as a presence that lingered, not to frighten the living, but to remain involved. The dead were believed to stay near the places they once loved, watching quietly, observing the behavior of those who remained. This belief shaped daily life in subtle ways. It softened grief by replacing absence with continuity. A loved one was not gone, they were simply quieter. Folklore filled the space between life and death with meaning. Ghosts were not always vengeful or terrifying. Many were remembered as familiar. A figure seen near a doorway, a sound on the stairs at night, a presence felt rather than seen. These signs were not treated as threats, they were treated as reminders. A reminder to speak kindly, to keep promises, to maintain the order that the dead had helped build. Medieval death beliefs turned morality into something ongoing. Ethics did not end at the grave, they were believed to be monitored. The dead, having crossed a boundary, were thought to understand the weight of actions more clearly. Their continued presence reinforced social behavior without force. There were no trials held by ghosts, no punishments delivered dramatically. Instead, there was unease when rules were broken. Sleep grew restless, a house felt heavy. Silence lingered longer than usual. These sensations were interpreted as gentle correction. The dead were not angry, they were disappointed. This distinction mattered. Fear that comes from disappointment encourages reflection. Fear that comes from threat encourages resistance. Medieval folklore chose the former. Death rituals supported this relationship. Bodies were washed carefully, words were spoken slowly. The living addressed the dead directly, not to beg, but to explain, to reassure, to promise continuity. These rituals were not only for the deceased, they were for the living. They allowed grief to settle into responsibility. To live well was to honor the watching dead. This belief reduced chaos. It created a sense of accountability that extended beyond human authority. Even when alone, a person was not unseen. The dead were believed to notice. This did not create panic, it created steadiness. People moved more thoughtfully, they behaved with consistency, not because they feared punishment, but because they felt witnessed. Over time, the presence of death became ordinary. Children grew up knowing that ancestors were nearby, not haunting, but accompanying. Stories told before sleep included the dead as part of the household memory. Names were spoken, lessons repeated. The boundary between living and dead felt thin but calm. This calm was essential. A society constantly confronted by mortality needed reassurance, not terror. Folklore provided that reassurance by making death familiar. A neighbor can be acknowledged without fear. A neighbor can be greeted respectfully. A neighbor can be lived alongside. In this way, death lost its sharpness. It remained serious but not overwhelming.
The dead stayed to guide, not to harm, and when guidance was received, silence followed. Not an empty silence, but a peaceful one. The kind that settles into the room after a conversation has ended naturally. The dead had said what they needed to say. The living had listened, and silence returned.
As medieval life continued under the quiet awareness of death, signs and omens became part of daily interpretation. These were not dramatic prophecies shouted from rooftops. They were small disturbances, subtle shifts, moments that felt slightly out of place. A candle flickering without wind, a dog howling at dusk, a clock stopping briefly before resuming. Such moments were believed to be messages, not warnings of doom, but nudges toward attention. The dead, it was thought, spoke rarely and softly. They did not interrupt life, they commented on it. An omen appeared when behavior drifted too far from balance, when promises were forgotten, when kindness thinned, when excess replaced care. These signs were not feared as punishments, they were treated as reminders to pause, to reflect, to correct course gently. Medieval folklore framed these moments as opportunities rather than threats. The dead were not angry judges, they were quiet witnesses. Because of this, people did not panic when signs appeared. They listened, they adjusted small behaviors, they restored rituals. A prayer was said, a promise remembered, a conflict softened. And when balance returned, the signs faded. This system worked because it relied on interpretation rather than enforcement. There were no fixed meanings carved in stone. Each household understood signs in its own way. This flexibility prevented fear from becoming rigid. Fear that is rigid becomes terror. Fear that is flexible becomes guidance. Folklore understood this distinction well. Spirits that lingered were often described as unfinished, not malicious. They stayed because something remained unresolved, a duty incomplete, a kindness unpaid, a story untold. Helping these spirits was seen as a moral act. Candles were lit, names were spoken, objects were returned to rightful places. Through these gestures, the living completed what the dead could not. This reinforced responsibility. Life did not end obligations, it extended them. This belief encouraged care beyond immediate consequence. Even small acts mattered. Even private actions counted. Someone, somewhere was aware. This awareness was comforting rather than threatening. It meant that actions were meaningful even in solitude. At night, this belief softened fear of darkness. The dark was not empty, it was inhabited by memory. The presence of spirits did not crowd the room, it steadied it. Silence at night was not loneliness, it was shared quiet. The dead were believed to settle in familiar spaces, not to intrude, but to remain near what they loved. This proximity reassured the living. Death did not remove connection, it changed its form. Over time, these ideas shaped a calmer relationship with mortality. People did not rush to deny death, they acknowledged it daily through habit, through respect, through care. In doing so, death lost its ability to shock constantly. It remained serious, but predictable. Predictability reduced fear. Reduced fear allowed rest. Even grief was managed gently. Mourning was slow, structured, and communal. It did not isolate, it integrated. The dead were spoken to, not spoken over. Their presence lingered as guidance, not weight. When the living lived well, the dead were believed to grow quieter. Their messages became unnecessary. Their work was done. Signs stopped appearing. Omens resolved into normality. This quieting was seen as success,
a sign that harmony had been restored. And with harmony restored, the world felt steady again. Night fell without tension. Sleep arrived without struggle. The living trusted that they were not alone, and that they were living in a way that honored those who watched quietly from the edge of memory.
Over time, as medieval communities learned to live with death rather than against it, the presence of the dead became quieter. Not because the dead had gone far away, but because their reminders were no longer necessary. Folklore taught that spirits stayed only as long as they were needed. When the living listened, adjusted, and remembered, the dead rested. This idea transformed death from a constant threat into a silent agreement. The dead would remain nearby as witnesses, but only until order was restored. Once harmony returned, they withdrew into stillness. This withdrawal was not abandonment, it was trust. Trust that the living had learned what they needed to know. Houses that once felt heavy became calm again. Sleep returned to its natural rhythm. Dreams softened. Silence lengthened, not with tension, but with ease. Medieval people believed this quiet was earned. It came from living attentively, from honoring promises, from maintaining balance in daily life. The dead were not appeased by grand gestures, they were soothed by consistency. Small acts mattered most. A candle lit at the right time, a name spoken gently, a wrong quietly corrected. These actions signaled respect, and respect allowed the dead to step back. Death rituals reflected this belief. Mourning was not rushed, but it was not endless. Grief had its place, and then it slowly released its hold. The living were encouraged to return to routine, not to forget the dead, but to integrate them into memory rather than presence. The dead became stories, lessons, and quiet influences. They no longer needed to appear. Their work continued invisibly. This invisibility was comforting. It meant that life could continue without constant interruption. Children learned that when they behaved well, the house felt lighter. When they acted with care, nights passed smoothly. The absence of signs became a sign itself, a sign that harmony was intact. In this way, silence was not emptiness, it was confirmation. Confirmation that balance had been restored. Medieval folklore valued this silence deeply. It was the reward for attention, for moral effort, for living in alignment with the unseen. Death, having fulfilled its role as teacher, stepped aside. It did not disappear completely. It remained close but unobtrusive, like a neighbor who no longer needs to knock. This understanding reduced fear of dying itself. Death was not a sudden leap into the unknown. It was a familiar transition observed many times before. The dead had gone there and returned, not in body, but in guidance. Knowing this softened anxiety. It allowed people to imagine their own death not as isolation, but as continuation, as another form of presence that would one day quiet when no longer needed. This belief made sleep easier. Night was no longer rehearsal for disappearance. It was practice for trust. Trust that letting go did not mean being lost. As people lay down to rest, they did not fear what watched them. They felt supported by it. The dead were not hovering in judgment. They were settled, satisfied, and silent. The work of guidance was complete, and with nothing left to correct, nothing left to warn, the world grew still. Breath slowed. Thoughts drifted. The boundary between waking and sleeping softened, just as the boundary between living and dead had softened before. And in that gentle stillness, silence returned, not as absence, but as peace. Not every witch cast spells. Some simply knew too much. In the medieval world, knowledge did not circulate freely. It settled. It gathered in hands that worked quietly and minds that observed patiently. Women were often the keepers of this kind of knowing. They learned through repetition, through care, through listening to bodies and seasons. They remembered which herbs soothed fever, which words calmed fear, which rituals eased birth and grief. This knowledge was practical, intimate, and powerful. It did not announce itself, it whispered. Folklore grew around these whispers, not to celebrate them, but to contain them. Stories transformed skilled women into dangerous figures, not because they harmed, but because they exceeded expectation. A woman who knew more than she should disrupted balance, not cosmic balance, but social balance. Medieval communities relied on clear roles to function smoothly. When someone moved beyond those roles without permission, folklore responded. It reframed excess knowledge as threat. The word witch became a boundary marker. It warned others where the limits lay. Importantly, these stories did not emerge from nowhere. They were shaped by anxiety. Anxiety about unpredictability, about power that could not be easily supervised. Women's knowledge often operated outside formal institutions. It passed from mother to daughter, neighbor to neighbor, midwife to apprentice. Because it was informal, it was difficult to regulate. Folklore stepped in where law could not. It turned caution into narrative. A woman who healed without approval was not merely helpful, she was suspicious. A woman who spoke confidently about the body or the future was not wise, she was unsettling. These stories softened confrontation. Instead of openly suppressing knowledge, communities allowed fear to do the work. Fear encouraged silence. Silence restored familiar order. This process was subtle. Many accused witches were not dramatic outsiders. They were familiar figures, healers, widows, midwives. Their difference lay not in appearance, but in autonomy. They acted without asking. They understood patterns others did not. Folklore amplified this difference into something symbolic. The witch was not a person, she was a role created to explain discomfort. This explanation allowed communities to avoid questioning their own structures. Rather than ask why knowledge was unevenly distributed, folklore warned against crossing invisible lines. In this way, fear became a social tool, not loud, not violent at first, quiet, persistent, effective. Over time, women learned to lower their voices, to share selectively, to disguise knowledge as intuition or tradition rather than expertise. Knowledge learned to whisper. This whispering preserved wisdom while reducing risk. Folklore encouraged this outcome. It allowed knowledge to survive in fragments, passed carefully, hidden in stories and songs. Even accusations carried lessons. They taught what to conceal and when. They taught that power could exist, but only if it remained invisible. This invisibility shaped medieval life deeply. It created a culture where influence was exercised indirectly, where control was maintained through narrative rather than force. Women navigated this landscape skillfully. They adapted. They encoded knowledge in ritual. They preserved care under the guise of obedience. Folklore, while restrictive, also revealed the importance of what it tried to suppress. If women's knowledge had been insignificant, it would not have needed containment. The persistence of witch stories proves their influence. These stories endured because the knowledge they pointed to endured. Quietly, carefully, passed on despite fear. And as night fell and stories were told in low voices, this knowledge settled back into the shadows, not gone, but waiting. And knowledge learned to whisper.
As folklore continued to shape medieval life, control rarely arrived as command. It arrived as story. Stories traveled more easily than laws. They slipped into homes at night, into conversations by the fire, into lullabies sung to children. Through these stories, power learned to move quietly. Women who already carried much of the community's daily knowledge, were placed at the center of this quiet negotiation. Folklore did not forbid them to know, it instructed them how to know safely. The lesson was subtle but firm. Knowledge was permitted only when it remained useful to others and invisible to authority. Anything beyond that became suspect. Witch stories enforced this boundary without open confrontation. A woman did not need to be punished publicly for stepping beyond her role. It was enough that others grew cautious around her. Distance did the work. Silence followed. Order returned. This was control through atmosphere rather than force, through mood rather than decree. Folklore made this control feel natural. It framed limitation as protection. The witch was portrayed as someone who had crossed a line and paid the price. The lesson was not shouted, it was absorbed slowly. Over time, women learned to practice knowledge in ways that avoided attention. Remedies were offered as tradition rather than innovation. Advice was given as care rather than authority. Insight was softened with humility. These strategies allowed wisdom to circulate while appearing harmless. This circulation mattered. Communities depended on women's knowledge more than they admitted. Birth, illness, food, grief, and weather all required practical understanding. Folklore could not erase this need, it could only redirect it. And so, knowledge was pushed into the margins, where it became resilient. Marginal knowledge adapts, it survives by changing shape. Songs carried instructions, stories preserved techniques, superstitions encoded observations. What could not be spoken directly was spoken indirectly. This indirection was powerful. It allowed women to influence outcomes without claiming power. Influence without visibility is difficult to suppress. Folklore recognized this and attempted to contain it by defining acceptable limits. The witch, as a figure, marked the edge of tolerance. She was the warning of what happened when knowledge became too visible, too confident, too independent. Yet this warning also revealed anxiety. Authority fears what it cannot fully control. Women's knowledge existed in relationships rather than institutions. It lived in trust rather than record. This made it durable. Even when witch accusations increased, knowledge did not disappear. It learned new disguises. Healers became helpers. Midwives became aunts. Wise women became old neighbors. The roles changed. The function remained. Folklore both constrained and preserved this system. By pushing knowledge into quieter forms, it unintentionally ensured its survival. Loud power attracts resistance. Quiet power persists. Medieval women understood this intuitively. They did not seek recognition, they sought continuity. Their goal was not dominance, but care. Folklore misread this care as threat because care operates outside hierarchy. It answers need, not command. This made it difficult to regulate. Stories attempted to regulate it anyway. They taught caution, they taught restraint, they taught women to lower their gaze while keeping their understanding sharp. Over generations, this produced a culture of whispering knowledge, knowledge that traveled slowly but reliably, knowledge that adapted to fear without being destroyed by it. This whispering shaped medieval society profoundly. It allowed communities to function despite rigid roles. It softened the edges of authority. It ensured survival during crises when formal systems failed. Witch stories, while oppressive, also testify to the indispensability of women's wisdom. If it had been truly marginal, it would not have needed such elaborate containment. The very effort to control it reveals its strength. And so, beneath the surface of fear and accusation, another story unfolded. A story of adaptation, of quiet persistence, of knowledge that learned not to shout, but to endure. As night deepened and voices lowered, this knowledge settled back into its familiar place, moving gently through memory, tradition, and care. And knowledge continued to whisper.
In the medieval world, childhood was not designed for comfort. It was designed for survival. Long before schools existed as formal institutions, long before written rules reached every home, folklore became the first classroom a child ever entered, and the lessons began early, often at night, often whispered softly, often wrapped in fear. Adults understood something fundamental. Children learn fastest through emotion, and fear, more than kindness, stayed with them. Bedtime stories were not meant to soothe, they were meant to shape behavior before reasoning could form. A child did not need to be told why the fire was dangerous. The story of the creature living inside the hearth did the work. A child did not need to understand roads or strangers. The tale of what waited beyond the village boundary created instinctive caution. These stories were not random, they were carefully constructed. Each fear had a purpose. Each monster guarded a rule. Each warning replaced an explanation that a child was not yet ready to understand. Obedience came before comfort, because obedience kept children alive. Medieval parents lived with constant risk. Disease, hunger, accidents, and violence were always close. There was little room for trial and error. Folklore compressed generations of experience into images that could be remembered instantly. A child did not have to recall a list of instructions, they only had to remember the story. Fear made memory efficient. Over time, these stories became rituals, told in the same way, at the same time, with the same tone. The predictability mattered. It signaled safety within structure. The child learned that fear existed within boundaries, that as long as they stayed inside the rules, nothing would happen. Monsters only came when rules were broken. This conditional fear created discipline without constant supervision. Parents did not need to watch every moment. The story watched instead. Even alone, the child behaved as if observed. This internalized discipline was powerful. It followed the child into adulthood. Folklore thus achieved what institutions later struggled to replicate: self-regulation. Children learned not just what to avoid, but how to anticipate consequences emotionally. This emotional anticipation guided behavior more reliably than punishment. The goal was not terror, it was alignment. A child aligned with social expectations could move safely through the world. Comfort was secondary. Comfort could wait. Survival could not. Yet within this system, there was also care. The same stories that frightened also reassured. They taught that danger was predictable, that rules worked, that adults understood the world and had mapped its risks. Fear was framed, not chaotic. This framing allowed children to sleep after listening. The story ended with resolution. The monster stayed away. The child who obeyed was safe. The room grew quiet. In this quiet, trust formed. Trust in structure, trust in order, trust that the world, though dangerous, was navigable. Medieval childhood folklore did not aim to break children, it aimed to prepare them. It gave them tools disguised as fears, boundaries disguised as monsters, lessons disguised as whispers. Over time, these fears softened. As children grew, the stories lost their sharp edges. What remained was instinct, a sense of caution, a respect for limits. By the time reasoning matured, behavior was already shaped. Folklore had done its work early, quietly, and effectively. And when night came and the final story was told, the child did not lie awake in terror. The fear had already completed its task. Obedience had been learned. Safety had been secured. And wrapped in the familiar rhythm of warning and reassurance, the child finally slept. As children grew older, the monsters of their early stories did not disappear, they changed shape. What once lived under the bed moved quietly into memory, instinct, and expectation. Medieval folklore was never meant to be outgrown, it was meant to mature alongside the child.
The fears learned early were designed to become internal guides later in life. A child who learned not to wander at night became an adult who respected boundaries without questioning them. A child who feared unseen watchers learned to behave properly even when no one was present. Over time, the stories stopped being remembered as stories. They became feelings, a hesitation before acting, a sense of unease when stepping outside accepted roles. This was folklore's most effective achievement. It transformed external discipline into internal restraint. Once this transformation occurred, authority no longer needed to intervene often. The individual regulated themselves. Medieval societies relied on this deeply. Resources were limited. Supervision was inconsistent. Written law could not reach every moment. But internalized fear filled the gaps. It created predictability. Adults who had grown up with these stories knew how far they could go. They sensed when a line was near. Even without recalling the tale itself, the boundary remained intact. This allowed communities to function with minimal enforcement. Order became habitual. Children, having absorbed fear before comfort, carried that structure forward. They raised their own children the same way, repeating the stories with slight variations. The cycle continued. Folklore thus became a self-renewing system. It required no central authority, no institution, no formal training. It passed quietly from mouth to ear, from generation to generation. Over time, the emotional intensity softened, but the framework stayed. Fear mellowed into caution, monsters faded into metaphors, but the lessons persisted. This persistence explains why certain social behaviors felt natural rather than imposed. People did not feel controlled, they felt guided. The guidance had been present for as long as they could remember. That familiarity made it invisible. Invisible systems are the hardest to challenge. Medieval folklore achieved stability by embedding discipline into identity itself. To behave properly was not merely to follow rules, it was to be oneself. Deviating from expectation felt like a personal failing rather than a social one. Shame replaced punishment. Anxiety replaced surveillance. This internal pressure was more efficient than force. It operated constantly, without effort. Children who had once feared bedtime stories became adults who told them. In doing so, they reinforced the same emotional architecture that had shaped them. This reinforcement was not malicious, it was practical. The world remained dangerous. Children still needed protection. Folklore offered a proven method. Even when conditions improved slightly, the stories remained. Tradition outlived necessity. Over generations, the original reasons for fear were forgotten, but the fear itself remained useful. It kept people cautious. It kept them predictable. It kept them within known paths. This predictability was valued more than comfort. Medieval life demanded reliability. People needed to know how others would behave. Folklore ensured this by standardizing emotional responses early in life. A shared fear created shared expectations. Shared expectations created social cohesion. This cohesion reduced conflict. It allowed cooperation without constant negotiation. In this way, childhood fears designed by adults became the invisible foundation of medieval society. They shaped not only individual behavior, but collective rhythm. Markets opened and closed at expected times, homes quieted at night, roads emptied, rules were followed without reminders. All of this rested on lessons learned before memory could distinguish story from reality. As night approached and households settled, these internalized fears worked gently. They did not shout, they nudged. A reminder to stay inside, a feeling that it was time to rest, a sense that safety lay in stillness. The child inside the adult recognized the pattern and responded automatically. There was comfort in this familiarity, the same structure that once frightened now soothed. Knowing the rules meant knowing where danger ended. Within those boundaries, rest was possible. And so, as adults lay down to sleep, they carried with them the echoes of childhood lessons, not as terror, but as calm order. The world felt contained, predictable, quiet. And in that quiet, shaped long ago by whispered stories, sleep arrived easily.
Eventually, the fears that once kept children awake no longer felt like fears at all. They became habits, and habits, when repeated gently and consistently, feel like comfort. Medieval folklore understood this transformation deeply. Fear was never meant to stay sharp forever. Its purpose was to guide behavior until guidance no longer needed emotion. Once habits formed, fear could soften. A child who once lay still because of monsters eventually lay still because stillness felt right. The rule remained, but the story faded. This was the final stage of folklore's design. Control no longer required stories. It lived inside routine. Nightfall became predictable. Lamps were dimmed. Doors were barred. Voices lowered. These actions happened without instruction, without fear, without thought. They felt natural. This naturalness was the true achievement. When behavior feels natural, it is rarely questioned. Medieval societies relied on this unquestioned rhythm. Childhood fears prepared the body and mind to accept structure long before choice became possible. By adulthood, structure felt like rest. Stillness felt like safety. Silence felt earned. Folklore had reshaped the emotional landscape so thoroughly that obedience no longer felt imposed. It felt familiar. This familiarity allowed sleep to arrive easily. The same rules that once warned now reassured. Knowing what not to do meant knowing where peace existed. Peace lived inside boundaries. The boundaries were learned early, practiced daily, and eventually trusted completely. This trust is what allowed fear to dissolve without chaos. Without fear, rules can collapse. But when fear becomes habit, order remains without tension. Medieval parents may not have described it this way, but they sensed it intuitively. Stories frightened children just enough to build patterns. Patterns replaced fear. Once replaced, fear was no longer needed. This gentle disappearance of fear is why so many medieval bedtime stories ended calmly. The monster retreated. The danger passed. The child slept. The repetition of this ending taught the nervous system that resolution was possible, that the world did not remain dangerous forever, that compliance led to calm. Over time, this expectation of calm became stronger than the memory of fear. The body learned when to rest. The mind learned when to quiet itself. Folklore thus functioned as early sleep training long before the term existed. It synchronized individual rest with communal rhythm. When everyone slept at similar times, society stabilized. Energy was conserved. Risk decreased. Life continued. As adults, people no longer remembered why they closed the door at night. They simply did. They no longer recalled the monster's name.
They only felt that staying inside felt right. This forgetting was essential. When fear is remembered, it can resurface. When it is forgotten but its lesson remains, it becomes harmless. Folklore achieved this balance carefully. It allowed fear to fade while preserving structure. That preservation mattered more than the emotion itself. By the end of childhood, the lesson was complete. The child did not need to be watched. They watched themselves. And when they became parents, they passed on the same rhythms, not out of cruelty, but out of continuity. They told the stories softly, then less often, then not at all, but the habits remained. The house still quieted at night, the child still slept. In this way, medieval folklore designed a cycle that ended in rest. Fear entered first, habit followed, sleep came last. And when sleep arrived, it was deep, untroubled, and shared. The child finally slept, not because danger was gone, but because the world felt ordered enough to rest within. And in that rest, shaped long ago by whispered fears and gentle routines, silence settled completely.
Even though the medieval stories no longer feel real, their shapes remain everywhere. We no longer believe in the creatures, the curses, or the whispered warnings, yet our lives still move along paths carved by them. This is the quiet power of folklore. It does not need belief to survive. It only needs repetition. Medieval people lived inside stories because stories were the safest way to pass rules through generations. Today, we live inside habits that feel rational, modern, and self-chosen. But many of those habits were born long before we ever questioned them. We lock doors at night without thinking of monsters. We lower our voices in certain places without remembering why. We teach children what is appropriate long before they understand consequence. The stories have faded, but the behavior remains. This is how folklore completes its journey. It sheds its imagery and keeps its structure. Fear does not disappear, it transforms. It becomes preference, instinct, and morality. What once frightened us into obedience now feels like common sense. Medieval folklore taught people how to live together without constant force. Modern life still relies on the same principle. We no longer need bedtime monsters because we have internal boundaries. We no longer need whispered warnings because we feel discomfort when we step outside norms. That discomfort is inherited. It did not begin with us. It is the echo of centuries of instruction, softened and normalized. When medieval parents told stories to shape children, they were not trying to terrify them forever. They were teaching them how to fit into a fragile world. Today's world feels different, but the need for fitting in remains. We still fear being out of place. We still fear crossing invisible lines. We still adjust ourselves before we fully understand why. Folklore has simply changed costumes. Where there were once spirits and witches, there are now expectations and unspoken rules. Where there were once curses, there is now social judgment. The mechanism is the same, only the language has changed. This realization can feel unsettling, but it can also feel grounding. It reminds us that we are not uniquely anxious or cautious. We are participating in a long human pattern. Folklore did not fail. It succeeded so completely that it no longer looks like folklore. It looks like us. Our routines, our instincts, our sense of right and wrong are shaped by stories told long ago, refined by generations, and passed on without names. When we hesitate before speaking, when we follow traditions we cannot fully explain, when we feel guilt without a clear source,
We're touching the afterlife of folklore, not its fear, but its structure. This structure once kept communities alive. It reduced chaos, it synchronized behavior, it created shared rhythms that allowed people to rest at the same time, work together, and trust one another's predictability. Those rhythms still exist. They are quieter now, but they remain powerful. Understanding this does not mean we must reject them. It simply means we can rest within them consciously. Medieval people rested because they trusted the rules of their world. We rest because the rules feel internal. They no longer need to be enforced. This is the final inheritance of folklore. We do not carry the stories, we carry the order they created. And because that order lives inside us, fear is no longer required. The lessons have already settled. The warnings have already softened. The night no longer needs monsters. It only needs stillness. And as you listen now, you are not being taught, you are being reminded. Reminded that the path has already been walked, that the world has learned how to quiet itself, that you do not need to stay alert. The stories have done their work. You can let them rest, and you can rest with them.
And now, the stories no longer need to work. They have already done everything they were meant to do. The fears that once guarded the night have stepped aside. The rules they carried have settled so deeply inside you that they no longer need voices, images, or reminders. What remains is calm. Not the kind that must be earned, but the kind that arrives naturally when nothing is left to manage. Medieval folklore began as protection. It ended as rhythm. And rhythm, when trusted, becomes rest. You no longer need to stay alert. The boundaries are already in place. The world feels contained, predictable enough to relax into. The night does not require explanation. It simply unfolds. Generations before you learned how to let go at this hour. They closed their doors, lowered their lamps, and allowed silence to return. You are continuing that same motion now, without effort. You are not obeying a story. You are resting inside a pattern older than memory. This pattern does not ask for belief. It only asks for stillness. As your breathing slows, there is nothing to watch for, no lesson waiting to be learned, no warning left to hear. The work of fear is complete. It has transformed into quiet guidance, and now even that guidance fades. What remains is the space it created, a space where the body knows how to soften, where the mind knows how to release its grip, where the night feels wide, gentle, and safe. Medieval people slept not because they understood the world fully, but because they trusted its order. That trust has been passed down, refined, and simplified until it feels like instinct. You do not need to think about it. You are already doing it. The silence around you is not empty. It is full of permission. Permission to stop monitoring. Permission to stop preparing. Permission to simply be. Folklore once whispered rules into the dark. Tonight, it whispers nothing at all. It stands back. It lets the quiet speak. You do not need fear anymore. Fear has already become habit, and habit has become comfort. Comfort has become rest. The night carries you gently now, the way it has carried countless others before. There is no urgency, no expectation, no edge left to soften. Everything that needed to be learned has already settled. Everything that needed to be guarded has already been guarded. You are free to let your awareness drift.
free to follow the slow rhythm of your breath, free to sink into the familiar stillness that waits beneath thought. This is not forgetting. This is completion. The stories are not lost, they are fulfilled. They have become part of the quiet structure holding you now, and because of that, you can release them completely. Let the last trace of attention dissolve. Let the day loosen its hold. Let the night do what it has always done best: hold you, carry you, and allow you to rest.